John Wick stepped quietly into the gym, eyes locked on the group, laughing as they circled a defenseless man on the bench. He'd seen cruelty before, but something about their mocking laughter set a fire in his veins. Tonight, they'd discover what it meant to be hunted by Baba Yaga. John Wick never anticipated he'd set foot in a local gym again. After the chaos that had overrun his life, after the bloodshed and the losses, he only wanted peace. But healing demanded motion. And so he found himself standing outside Ironwood Fitness, an unremarkable building with a weather-worn sign and tinted windows. He hesitated a moment, hand hovering by the door handle, before finally pushing inside. A wave of familiar scents rolled over him: rubberized mats, disinfectant, and the faint tang of sweat. Treadmills lined one wall, their hum adding a quiet backdrop to the clang of weights. It was surprisingly calm for late afternoon. A few people pumped iron, a couple of joggers dripped sweat on the treadmills, and off in the corner stood a row of punching bags that immediately caught Wick's attention. For a man who had fought his way through endless nights, the rhythmic thump of fists against heavy canvas offered a sense of comfort. He approached the gym counter to check in. The teenager behind it wore an indifferent expression, eyes flicking from Wick's face to the new membership form. "Name," he droned. "John," Wick said quietly. He didn't volunteer a last name. The fewer questions, the better. The kid stamped a guest pass, thrust it across the counter, and waved John through. Wick slid past rows of shiny equipment until he reached a free bench. He sat, ignoring curious glances from the other patrons. Dressed simply in black sweats, hood pulled up, he was nearly invisible, if not for his posture, which radiated a coiled intensity. That posture, that quiet aura, used to be a death sentence for anyone foolish enough to cross him. Here, he hoped it would go unnoticed. He began with a light warm-up. Old scars tugged at his limbs, reminding him that while he was no longer the unstoppable force from years past, the instincts and muscle memory never quite faded. Each rep felt like a small step toward regaining a piece of himself. Perhaps, if he kept his head down and quietly worked through his routine, he might find some measure of serenity. But fate had other plans. It started as a flicker of commotion near the free weight section. Wick's keen senses caught on to raised voices. He paused mid-rep, glancing over to see a tall black man, young, college-aged maybe, working through a set of squats. 3 men hovered behind him, snickering under their breath. The black man, who wore a faded blue tank top and baggy basketball shorts, did his best to ignore them. Still, the tension emanating from his posture was unmistakable. Between sets, he rested the bar, breathing heavily. One of the 3 men behind him took that moment to mutter something insulting, something Wick couldn't entirely make out, but recognized by tone alone. It dripped with malice. The other 2 cackled. A memory flashed through Wick's mind, times when he'd stood by, silent, even as cruelty unraveled in front of him. He'd always rationalized it as, not my fight. But he'd learned, painfully, brutally, that there are battles you can't just walk away from. And so, he found himself watching the scene more closely, tension building in his chest. "Hey, Toby," one of the bullies teased, reading the name off a water bottle. "Why are you hogging all the weights? You trainin' to run away? You got the genetics for it, right?" Wick's stomach tightened. He knew racism when he heard it, no matter how it was dressed up. Toby kept his head down, trying to focus on his workout, but his hands trembled on the barbell. The bullies fed off his discomfort, continuing in louder whispers now audible to anyone close enough to care. The few people around either pretended not to notice or glanced away nervously. Wick racked his weights and stood. He didn't plan on getting involved, but he also couldn't abide that kind of harassment. Still, he took a moment to gauge the situation. 3 men, all in their mid-20s, broad-shouldered and cocky, probably used to being the loudest in the room. Toby was bigger than them in height, but gentler in demeanor. He wore the expression of someone who'd dealt with prejudice before and was trying not to escalate it. Wick stepped closer, just within earshot. Another barrage of insults. Toby's face fell, clearly fighting anger and humiliation. The largest bully, short blonde hair and a barrel chest, muttered, "You're not as strong as you think you are. Might want to stay in your lane." Toby took a measured breath. "Man, I'm just here to work out. Leave me alone." But that only fueled them. The 2 sidekicks snickered, while the blonde one swaggered forward. "What if I don't? What if this gym's not big enough for you and me? John Wick understood provocation. He knew bullies thrived on the sense that they had an audience, that everyone else was too scared to interfere. They pressed boundaries, waiting to see how far they could push someone. Without overthinking, Wick walked up to Toby's station and slipped off a 10-pound plate from the bar as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Toby glanced at him, confusion flickering in his eyes. The three bullies stiffened. "Dude, what are you doing?" Toby asked, clearly perplexed. Wick placed the plate neatly on the rack. Then he turned, letting his gaze sweep across the three bullies. The look in his eyes was calm but intense, as if measuring them for an unseen coffin. He spoke softly, so only they could hear. He asked to be left alone. The blonde ringleader blinked, looking Wick up and down. Realizing it was just a single guy, albeit one with an unsettling presence, he puffed out his chest. "Mind your business, old man." Wick ignored the barb. Instead, he studied each bully's stance, their posture. He noted how the blonde one favored his left leg, how the second, broad-shouldered with a shaved head, kept rolling his right shoulder, perhaps an old injury. The third had a swaggering walk but avoided direct eye contact. Long ago, Wick would have mentally planned out the quickest way to subdue them all. Now he simply folded his arms. "I am minding my business," he said. "That business is making sure no one gets harassed." "Yeah? And who the hell are you?" The blonde bully stepped closer. Toby edged sideways, fear and relief warring on his face. Clearly, he didn't want a confrontation, but he also didn't want to see an ally get hurt. Wick's voice remained low, almost dangerously soft. "Just someone who doesn't like hearing that kind of talk." A slow grin spread across the blonde man's face. "Great. Another wannabe hero." His two buddies sniggered, shifting into a loose stance. Toby took a half step forward, as if trying to defuse the tension. "Look, it's fine. I'll move to another machine." Wick held up a hand. "You stay? They can find somewhere else to go." The blonde bully's grin vanished. "What did you say?" In that charged moment, Wick felt the hush that fell over the corner of the gym. A few heads turned in their direction, and even the dull roar of the treadmill motors seemed to fade. The blonde bully's nostrils flared. Toby clenched his jaw. The air was thick with the promise of violence. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice cut through the tension. The gym manager, a solidly built man in a polo shirt, name tag pinned to his chest. He had clearly noticed the standoff and decided to intervene. The blonde bully shot Wick a glare before turning to the manager with a tight smile. "No problem. We were just joking around. But this guy," he jabbed a thumb at Toby, "is hogging the rack." Toby opened his mouth to protest, but Wick gently touched his arm. "He's not hogging anything." They were mocking him. He locked eyes with the manager. "You should probably check your security camera's audio." The manager's face fell. He exhaled, clearly not wanting a scene in his establishment. "Look," he said, "why don't we all just cool down and—" But the blonde bully had already decided he wasn't about to back off, not in front of his cronies, not in front of the entire gym. Pride is a fickle monster, and the man was consumed by it. "We don't need any cameras to prove anything," he sneered. "Just get out of my face, or I'll make you regret it." A hush spread across the watchers. No one quite knew John Wick, certainly not his background, but they sensed a kind of self-possession that ordinary folks rarely carried. Toby caught his breath, seeing danger flash in Wick's expression, a hint of something primal stirring behind those eyes. Wick stared at the bully for a beat, then lowered his voice. "Think carefully about what you're doing." A dark flush spread across the blonde man's cheeks. He clenched his fists, itching to throw a punch. His sidekicks shifted anxiously, emboldened by numbers, but visibly uncertain. The gym manager lifted his hands in a placating gesture. "Hey, calm. Too late." The blonde bully lashed out with a wide, angry hook aimed at Wick's jaw. In that instant, a swirl of adrenaline swept through the onlookers. Toby gasped. The manager stumbled back, startled. But to those who had faced real danger, and John Wick had faced far worse, it was a predictable, sloppy move. Wick leaned back with fluid ease, letting the punch sail past his chin. The blow glanced off his shoulder harmlessly. Then, with a speed that belied his calm demeanor, Wick stepped inside the bully's reach, grabbing his wrist to redirect the force. The momentum spun the blonde man off balance, nearly sending him crashing into the squat rack. A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. The other two bullies tensed, but one glimpse of Wick's leveled gaze stopped them in their tracks. He hadn't struck back with his full ability, far from it. But that effortless evasion was enough to flash a warning. Don't push your luck. The blonde bully scrambled upright, panting, a wild look of confusion and anger on his face. Before he could charge again, the manager, and now a second employee, stepped between them, arms outstretched. That's enough. We're calling the police if this escalates. Glaring daggers at Wick, the bully brushed the dust from his clothes. You'll regret this, he snapped, though his bravado sounded hollow. He eyed Toby too, hatred etched in his features. Without waiting for a response, the trio turned and marched toward the locker rooms, tossing muttered threats under their breath. The tension hung in the air, thick and claustrophobic. Toby exhaled shakily, shoulders sagging with relief. The handful of bystanders who had frozen during the altercation slowly returned to their routines, though many cast lingering, curious looks at Wick. You okay? Wick asked Toby, voice steady. Toby nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, thanks man. They've been on my case for weeks. I should have reported it, but he trailed off, emotion weighing his words. Wick gave a single nod. They won't bother you again. The gym manager stepped forward, frustration and concern mixing in his expression. That was too close. Look, I'm sorry I didn't intervene sooner. I'll file a formal complaint, see if I can revoke their memberships. Are you both all right? Toby managed a shaky smile. I'll be fine. John Wick said nothing at first, simply glancing toward the locker room doors where the bullies had disappeared. He sensed this confrontation wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Eventually, he turned to the manager. You do what you need to do. Deep down, Wick knew men like that rarely let go of a grudge easily. Pride wouldn't let them. And while he wanted nothing more than to finish his workout and return home, a quiet part of him stirred. The ghosts of his old life whispered that leaving a threat unresolved was dangerous. And in that moment, with Toby's gratitude shining in his eyes, John Wick understood. His search for peace might collide headlong with the part of himself that had never truly died. The part that would stand up, at any cost, against those who preyed on the vulnerable. John Wick didn't stay to finish his workout that day. Instead, he spoke briefly with Toby, just enough to confirm the young man lived nearby, that he'd been facing these bullies for months, and that they'd never escalated to physical violence until now. With polite but firm words, Wick assured Toby to call if any trouble followed him outside the gym. Toby scribbled his number on a scrap of paper, his expression torn between relief and lingering apprehension. Wick walked home through the setting sun, footsteps echoing against the pavement. A sense of foreboding trailed him like a shadow. Over time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Those bullies, humiliated in front of onlookers, would be looking for payback. Maybe I should have ended it right then and there, he thought, but quickly quashed that impulse. He was no longer the boogeyman of the underworld, or at least, he was trying not to be. Still, old habits ran deep. As soon as Wick reached his modest apartment, he checked the locks twice. He paced, recalling how easily the blonde bully's punch had been deflected. The entire confrontation had been a stark reminder of a part of him that was never truly buried. Violence might have lulled, but it remained coiled in his reflexes, ready to strike the moment he felt threatened. The next morning, John Wick returned to Ironwood Fitness. He tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, focusing on his routine, bench presses, lat pull-downs, then some light bag work to keep his reflexes sharp. But from the moment he walked in, he could sense the atmosphere had shifted. Whispers trailed him. Several gym-goers gave him respectful nods, no doubt having heard about the altercation. Toby was there too, doing overhead presses, his jaw set in concentration. When he spotted Wick, he offered a small, grateful wave. Wick acknowledged it with a curt nod. He scanned the gym and noticed, with mild relief, that the trio of bullies was absent. Maybe, just maybe, they'd taken the manager's warning to heart. He finished his workout without incident. After a quick shower, Wick slid into a black hoodie, quietly intending to exit before any new drama could unfold. As he neared the doors, Toby jogged after him. John, hey, wait. Wick turned, and Toby caught up, breathing a little unevenly. Just wanted to say thanks again. I was in a dark headspace, feeling cornered. You're stepping in, it meant a lot. Wick studied the younger man's earnest expression. I'm glad you're okay. Toby shrugged, forcing a grin. Yeah, I just hope they don't show up again. He lowered his voice. "The manager said he's reviewing their memberships, but I'm not sure if it'll stick. They have connections in town. Money, you know how it is." The mention of money and connections triggered Wick's instincts. He briefly recalled how, in his previous life, wealth and influence could bend rules to anyone's advantage. "If they come back," Wick said quietly, "let me know." Toby nodded, relieved. They parted ways, Toby heading for the locker room, Wick stepping out into the crisp morning air. He walked a few blocks to a nearby coffee shop, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to melt. Maybe, he thought, this was the end of it. It wasn't. By late afternoon, Wick had settled into the small reading nook in his apartment with a cup of tea, an attempt at adopting normal, calming hobbies that had never been part of his old life. His phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello." Wick answered, voice wary. A panicked voice crackled through the speaker. "Toby. John? Sorry, I got your number from the membership records. I'm in trouble. Those guys, they're outside my building." Wick set his teacup down. "Slow down. Are you safe?" "Not really. They followed me home from the gym. I saw them watching me from across the street. Then one of them, blonde, the same jerk from yesterday, walked up to my door. I think he was checking if it was locked." Toby's breath hitched. "I don't know if they have weapons. I called the cops, but," he swallowed audibly. "I'm scared, man. I don't have family here." Wick closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He'd promised himself he wouldn't get pulled back into a world of conflict, but hearing the tremor in Toby's voice, he felt no hesitation. "I'm coming. Text me your address." 5 minutes later, Wick strode out of his apartment with purposeful strides, the phone's GPS guiding him. Toby lived only a few blocks away, in an older complex pressed between a convenience store and a rundown laundromat. As Wick approached, he spotted the distinctive silhouette of the blonde bully leaning against a battered pickup truck. His two cronies were in the truck bed, rummaging for something. Wick slowed, scanning the street. Pedestrians hurried by, oblivious. Toby's building had a wide, chipped concrete stoop, and there, half concealed by a row of trash bins, Toby stood, phone clutched in his hand, eyes locked on the bullies across the road. Relief crossed his face the moment he saw Wick. Toby opened his mouth to speak, but Wick held up a hand, glancing around for signs of a larger ambush. "Any idea what they're doing?" Wick whispered. "They've been out here for half an hour," Toby replied, voice trembling. "They banged on my door a few times. Called me names. They said I'd regret humiliating them at the gym. They're waiting for me to come out." Wick's jaw clenched. On the sidewalk across from them, the blonde ringleader noticed Wick and Toby talking. He straightened, cracking his neck, a smug grin crawling onto his lips. The other two hopped off the truck bed, and one brandished a length of metal pipe. Suddenly, this was no ordinary intimidation. This was a real threat. "Stay here," Wick told Toby. Then, with deliberate calm, he crossed the street. The bullies waited in a triangle formation. Pedestrians skirted around them, likely sensing danger. The blonde man rolled up the sleeves of his hoodie, revealing forearms lined with amateur tattoos. Well, if it isn't the tough guy from the gym," he sneered. "Figured you'd come running." Wick stopped several paces away, hands relaxed at his sides. He observed the metal pipe in the shaved-headed one's grip, noted a glint of something else in the broad-shouldered third man's jacket, perhaps a knife. The blonde took a step forward. "You messed up, old man," the blonde hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Now you're going to pay for that. But first," he tilted his chin toward Toby, "we're going to teach that punk a lesson." Wick's posture remained controlled, but his voice dropped to a lethal hush. "No, you're not." He glanced at the pipe. "You sure you want to do this?" A flicker of hesitation darted through the men. They'd come prepared to intimidate, but now faced the same unwavering calm that had rattled them before. The shaved-headed bully with the pipe forced a laugh. "You're outnumbered. One call from us, and more'll show up. You think you're some kind of hero?" Wick didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the distance just enough to force them to react. The broad-shouldered man brandished a knife. Yes, it was definitely a knife, lifting it in a clumsy attempt at looking menacing. "Last chance," Wick said, tone flat. "Walk away." The blonde man sneered. "No chance. You want to protect your little friend? Then let's see you handle all of us." He lunged, swinging a wild punch. Wick angled his body, deflecting it with a forearm block. The man's momentum carried him forward, and Wick delivered a sharp strike to his abdomen, precise and controlled. The blonde bully gasped, doubling over. Almost simultaneously, the shaved-headed goon thrust the metal pipe toward Wick's ribs. Wick pivoted, letting the pipe graze his side with minimal contact. With lightning efficiency, he seized the man's wrist, twisting it just enough to dislodge the pipe. A pained yelp escaped the bully's lips as the pipe clattered to the pavement. Before the broad-shouldered one could even raise his knife for a proper attack, Wick whipped the pipe up from the ground, tapped the knife hand with enough force to jar it. The blade rattled onto the pavement. Wick kicked it aside, eyes never leaving his assailant. One more swift move, a blow with the end of the pipe to the man's thigh, sent him stumbling to one knee. The entire confrontation had erupted and nearly concluded in seconds. Toby, from across the street, watched in stunned silence. Passers-by froze, wide-eyed, or hurried away, not wanting to be entangled in the violence. Chest heaving, the blonde bully struggled upright, rage contorting his face. "Who the hell are you?" he spat. Wick remained silent, his presence alone providing the answer. The bullies had never encountered anything quite like him. Someone whose skill was so refined it was almost nonchalant. The shaved-headed man staggered back, cradling his wrist, while the broad-shouldered one limped. Their bravado was shattered, replaced by confusion and a dawning realization that they'd picked the wrong target. "Get out of here," Wick finally said, voice measured. "You won't get another warning." For a heartbeat, the three bullies glared, as though contemplating a final rush. But the look in Wick's eyes was colder than any threat they could muster. Cursing under their breath, they scrambled to retrieve their fallen weapons, grimacing from bruises that would undoubtedly ache later. Then they backed toward their pickup truck, never turning their backs on Wick. "This isn't over," the blonde man hissed, but it lacked conviction. He spat on the ground before climbing into the driver's seat. With a roar of the engine, the truck peeled away, leaving black streaks on the asphalt. Slowly, Wick exhaled, letting the tension drain from his muscles. Toby hurried over, relief and awe shining in his eyes. That was incredible. Are you sure you're not hurt?" Wick shook his head. "I'm fine." "You?" Toby smiled shakily. "Yeah, better than fine." He glanced in the direction of the departed truck. "Do you think they'll come back?" Wick's gaze trailed over the empty street. "They might, but let them think twice." Toby nodded, then swallowed hard. "Thank you, John. I never asked for this." And he broke off, seemingly unsure how to convey the depth of his gratitude. "I owe you one." Wick placed a reassuring hand on Toby's shoulder, though his expression was distant, as if listening for the ghosts of violence that forever haunted his footsteps. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just keep living your life. Don't let people like that scare you." Sirens sounded in the distance. Likely someone had called the police, reporting a street fight. Wick slipped the metal pipe to Toby with a quick jerk of his chin. "Drop this somewhere safe. You never touched it." Toby nodded, half confused, but did as told. Wick looked down the street, heart pounding. Confronting scum like these was second nature to him, but it also pulled him back into a world he desperately wanted to leave behind. However, seeing Toby safe and standing tall made it all feel justified. It reminded him that, sometimes, using his skills to protect others wasn't a curse, but a calling. The sirens grew louder. Wick turned away, slipping into a nearby alley before the squad cars appeared. He'd be a nameless presence in Toby's life, a guardian who emerged from the shadows, then vanished just as quickly. Not quite a normal man, not quite the legendary figure from whispered stories, but something in between. And as John Wick disappeared into the city's quiet streets, he felt a small sense of purpose flicker in his chest. He had intervened, just as he always did when injustice spat in his face. In a life defined by loss and grief, perhaps this was one way to find a semblance of redemption, by ensuring that, for at least one young man, the monsters of the world had reason to fear.